Welcome back to another scripture discovery. We have just completed our missions month and talked through various topics in scripture concerning missions and the call for us to send those out to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. And this week we are in chapter 9 of Proverbs. And to refresh our memory, remember, Proverbs is written by Solomon, the wisest king in Israel. And chapters 1 through 9 are written like a letter where Solomon is addressing his son and giving him instruction and wisdom in wise living and justice and equity. So we can consider chapter 9 a transition from Solomon writing this letter to his son to now what we know of Proverbs as these short, pithy statements which range in various topics. So this week we'll be going through Proverbs chapter 9, but next week we will transition to a more topical study. I'm not quite sure how that's going to look at this moment, but hopefully it'll work out for our video. Anyways, let's jump into our passage this week. Make sure you have it printed out in front of you and a pen or pencil, some highlighters, and let's dig into this passage together. Proverbs chapter 9, verses 1 through 18. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her beasts. She has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her young women to call from the highest places in the town. Whoever is simple, let him turn and hear. To him who lacks sense, she says, come, eat of my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways and live, and walk in the ways of insight. Whoever corrects a scoffer gets himself abuse, and he who reproves a wicked man incurs injury. Do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be still wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase in learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. For by me your days will be multiplied, and years will be added to your life. If you are wise for yourself. If you scoff, you alone will bear it. The woman folly is loud. She is seductive and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house. She takes a seat on the highest places of the town, calling to those who pass by, who are going straight on their way. Whoever is simple, let him turn and hear. And to him who lacks sense, she says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. All right, starting in verse 1, we're going to highlight the word wisdom. Remember, throughout the 8 previous chapters, we've been highlighting all the words that are synonymous with wisdom. For example, insight, knowledge, or instruction, words like that. Again, we see in verse 1 that wisdom is portrayed as a woman. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. I'm going to highlight all the action words that I see. Built and hewn are actions in our first verse. I'm also going to mark 7 pillars. This is something that I would want to look into a little deeper. Maybe check out some commentaries and figure out what these 7 pillars are, if there's anything behind it. There may be other scriptures where 7 pillars are mentioned, and so maybe Solomon is drawing upon something. It may even be connected in some way to the temple that Solomon builds. But at this time, I don't really know. Again, this is something that I want to check into a little deeper. Now, you might be wondering what hewn means, and I think it has something to do with digging or securing in some way. So she has hewn her 7 pillars. She has placed them securely, something along those lines. All right, verse 2, she has slaughtered her beasts, highlighting slaughtered, and she has mixed her wine, and she has also set her table. So it looks as though Lady Wisdom is putting a lot of time and effort into preparing this table. In verse 3, she has sent out her young women in order for them to call from the highest places in the town. I'm going to underline to call. This is related to the action to send. I also want to underline the phrase highest places in the town. We're going to see that phrase again later in our passage. Moving along, verse 4, whoever is simple, let him turn and hear. To him who lacks sense, she says, come eat of my bread and drink of the wine I've mixed. All right, here we have a quote. I'm going to highlight the phrase, whoever is simple. We're also going to see that phrase later in the passage. And here's a command, or it looks like a command. Let him turn and hear. So let him turn is the command. And then to him who lacks sense, she says. I'm also going to highlight that phrase, him who lacks sense. It looks as though there are 2 groups that the women are calling out to, those who are simple and those who lack sense. To the simple, it's a very short call. Let him turn and hear. But to those who lack sense, she says, come, eat of my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed. This is verse 5, and we're highlighting the word come. That is a command. Also, eat is a command. And I'm going to circle bread and wine. And I missed a command to drink. So let's highlight that. Now moving to verse 6. Leave your simple ways and live and walk in the way of insight. Leave is a command. And I'm also going to highlight the word ways. Remember, throughout the last 8 chapters, we were highlighting ways and paths, which really helped us see throughout the beginning of Proverbs these 2 distinct paths that Solomon is illustrating in his letter. Again, I think I'm going to highlight the word simple and link it back up to verse 4. In verse 6, we see another command to live. I'm going to highlight that, and I'm also going to box it and put a little mark next to it. I am thinking this call to live is key in Solomon's instructions. We also have to highlight walk, that is a command, in the way of insight, so we'll highlight way again, and insight. And I'm wondering if this makes a little inclusio, an inclusio where it starts with one topic and ends in the same topic using similar words or the same word. Here it starts with wisdom and it ends in insight. So I'll make a connection to those 2 words. All right, verse 7. Whoever corrects a scoffer gets himself abuse, and he who reproves a wicked man incurs injury. I'm going to mark the word whoever, and I think I'm going to mark it this way and move up to verse 4 and mark it in the same way. Verse 4 and verse 7 both start with whoever. I'm going to highlight the word corrects. There's a call for correction and for reproof. He who reproves a wicked man. I'll mark that. I'm also going to highlight scoffer. We'll make him red because he's not a very good guy. And that equates with the wicked man, so we'll mark him as well. Now, verse 7, he's giving a truth claim. If you correct a scoffer, you're going to get abuse. And if you reprove a wicked man, you'll get injured. Therefore, verse 8 is the command, do not reprove a scoffer. And I'm just going to highlight do not. So I'm going to highlight reprove the same color in verse that it's in verse 7. And of course, highlight scoffer. And I think I'm going to also circle some of the things that will incur if you do try to correct a scoffer and a wicked man. So there's abuse in verse 7. There's injury in verse 7. And there's hate in verse 8. And it's kind of interesting that Solomon starts with using the word correct concerning a scoffer, and then he changes to reproves, and then he continues to use that word to describe what's taking place or giving a command. So do not reprove a scoffer, and reprove a wise man, and he will love you. I'll highlight reprove again, and I think I'm going to highlight wise man, and highlight it in bright yellow, and circle the word love. All right, before we move on, notice the similarities between verses 7 and 8. It's using the same language, talking about reproving or correcting. It's talking about a scoffer. And in verse 8, there is a transition from looking at the scoffer or wicked man and moving towards the wise man. If you reprove a wise man, he will love you. So those are similarities and differences. Continuing on, verse 9, another command, give instruction. I'll highlight give. Instruction I consider as another word for wisdom. It's give instruction to a wise man, and he will be still wiser. And then teach a righteous man, and he will increase in learning. I'll highlight the word teach. Now highlight wise man, and the outcome of giving him instruction, he will be wiser. I'll also highlight righteous man, and circle increase in learning. And I think I'll make connections between 8 and 9 to love, wiser, and increase in learning. And I'm doing that because those are attributes of a wise man. He's going to love those who correct him or reprove him. He will receive instruction and become wiser for it. And he will continue to increase in learning, meaning he is teachable. Which means I probably should make the connections in verse 7 and 8 when it comes to the scoffer and wicked man. All right, that'll just help me draw my attention to those 6 words and see the distinction between them. Verse 10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. I'm highlighting that phrase, the fear of the Lord. Remember, this is very similar to chapter 1, and I'm thinking it's verse 7. I don't have it in front of me, so you're going to have to double check. Either verse 7 or maybe verse 11. Anyways, I think it's a little bit different because in chapter 1 it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Here it is wisdom, so let's highlight that. And also highlight the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. Again, we have wisdom and insight. And I'm going to make a connection between the fear of the Lord and the knowledge of the Holy One. So fearing the Lord and the knowledge of the Lord, knowing Him and fearing Him are connected. Now, moving to verse 11, let's mark the word for. For by me your days will be multiplied and your years will be added to your life. Now I'm going to highlight this a little bit differently, but I want to mark your days will be multiplied This is a truth claim that we really need to look into. Your days will be multiplied, and years will be added to your life. And what's also interesting about this verse is how it starts. For by me your days will be multiplied. And I guess I'm going to have to mark the word me and make it into a question. Who is that? Is that Solomon or is that wisdom? By me your days will be multiplied. Now I want to say that it is referring to wisdom. It makes more sense. However, I would think that this phrase, at least this verse, would have to be in quotes then. Remember, if it's wisdom that is speaking, it would have to be in quotes. Solomon is quoting wisdom. And of course, if it's Solomon, he doesn't need quotes. Now, if we move back up to verse 4, we see that the young women are calling out, and they are saying in verse 4, whoever is simple, let him turn here. And we see that quoted. And then, and I think I'm going to circle this, it says, she says. I'm going to circle that, and I guess put a little question mark above it. Is this a change, and it's going back to wisdom and her speaking, which we see in verse 5, that is quoted, come eat. Verse 6, leave your simple ways and walk in the way of insight, and that ends the quote. So the young women are speaking in verse 4, it looks like, and perhaps one of the young women or wisdom herself is speaking in verses 5 and 6. And then it looks as though Solomon is transitioning and speaking in his own words in verse 7 because there's no more quotes. When we follow that all the way through to verse 11, where it says, for by me your days will be multiplied. All right, I'll put that question above verse 11. I don't think it's too important of a question, but I do want to be accurate. Who is it that's going to add days to our lives? Who is it that is speaking this? Solomon or wisdom? And that brings us to verse 12. If you are wise, you are wise for yourself, and if you scoff, you alone will bear it. So we have two conditions. If you are wise, you're wise for yourself, and if you scoff, you alone bear it. I'm going to circle the word scoff, and that's referring back to being a scoffer. And I'm going to highlight the phrase, you alone will bear it. And I'm making that into a darker red. This seems to me a phrase of a kind of judgment, which brings me to the phrase in front of it, you are wise for yourself. I'm marking that as another question, asking what does Solomon mean by that? If you are wise for yourself. Is this something that is selfish? And if it's selfish, then we automatically think that it's bad. And of course, I'm not convinced of that. I think context can help us here. Going back to verse 11, I'm going to circle the word your. Actually, I'll circle your days and also your life. And I'm wondering if that's what Solomon is referring to. Basically saying, you will be blessed. Your days will be blessed. If you are wise for yourself. Things will go well for you. You will experience positive effects. Whereas if you scoff, you're going to bear the fruit of that as well on your own. And I think I'm going to make a connection with the word yourself and alone. So you alone will bear the fruit of scoffing. All right, verse 13. The woman folly is allowed. She is seductive and knows nothing. Woman folly, I'm going to highlight in red. Just like the scoffer, we see some attributes of woman folly. She is loud, she is seductive, and she knows nothing. Those are not great characteristics at all. This is someone you would definitely want to avoid, or something you would want to avoid. And I think from my limited knowledge, various things I've read so far, that word seductive does not necessarily mean sexual. I think another word that can be used is enticing or manipulating, something along those lines. I guess I could look into it a little deeper and verify that. Anyways, let's keep moving. Verse 14. She sits at the door of her house. I'm marking the word sits. She takes a seat on the highest places of the town. Remember, we underlined that phrase earlier in verse 3. So the women, the young women or the young servants of wisdom, are up in the high places of the town, and they are calling out, and so is woman folly. Notice that she doesn't have any servants. And also notice the difference in the action verbs we highlighted. In verses 1 through 3, wisdom has built and has hewn, has slaughtered, has mixed, has set her table, has sent out her young women to call. So she is very productive and busy, making sure everything is in order for this feast that she is providing. And going back to woman folly in verses 13 and 14, she's loud, she's seductive, she knows nothing, and she's sitting at the door of her house, taking a seat on the highest places, and she's calling to those who pass by, who are going straight on their way. Of course, that's verse 15. Again, I'm going to highlight the word calling. This is in conjunction with takes a seat. Let me highlight that whole phrase. There we go. I'm also going to circle the phrase, who are going straight. And of course, highlighting way. So here's a picture of servants, these young women who are in these high places calling out to the simple and those who lack sense to come in and eat. And next to them or near them is Lady Folly, the woman of folly, who is sitting there and calling out as well. And verse 15 gives us a better picture of what this looks like with these people that are going straight on their way. And I'm wondering if this is maybe a picture of those who are following the commands of the Lord, doing what is right. They are on the straight path. And here is Lady Folly tempting them to stray. All right, verse 16, whoever is simple. That is the same phrase in verse 4. In fact, the whole message is the same. Let him turn here. And we can highlight that as a command. Turn here. And again, we're going to highlight to him who lacks sense. And here's her claim. Stolen water is sweet. I'm going to circle water and also bread. Remember in verse 5, we marked bread and wine. This is a contrast. Instead of wine, it's water. And bread is the same. I'm also going to mark the word sweet and pleasant. And I think I'm going to point that back to the word seductive in verse 13. This is the kind of seductive message that woman folly is speaking. Also, notice the difference from verse 17 and verse 5. Verse 17 is written as a truth claim, whereas verse 5 is written as a command. Again, I don't think that's too significant, but it's kind of interesting in how one is speaking clearly and giving a charge or command while the other one is being a little bit more manipulative, perhaps. Anyways, verse 18, the last verse, but, which is a contrast, He does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. I'm circling the phrase does not know. Lack of knowledge, not good. Also going to highlight the dead, and I'm going to put a box around it and put a little mark next to it. And I'm doing that because it's a contrast from verse 6. Leave your simple ways and live. However, in verse 18, those who come to drink and eat from the table of woman folly, they do not realize it leads to death. I'm going to also highlight the depths of Sheol, basically meaning death as well. And I'm also going to mark the words her guests and point those back to those who lack sense and the simple in verse 16. And I'm wondering if that is connected to verse 15, those who are going straight. I'll make that connection. So it's this picture of those who are walking down this path or down this street. They're going straight on their way. Whether it's a good path or a bad path, I don't know. But I guess they're in relative safety going on their way. However, Lady Folly comes out and is trying to draw out the simple and those who lack sense to bring them into her home to feast on this sweet water and bread that is pleasant, and it'll be the death of them. On the other hand, we have Lady Wisdom with her young women calling out in these high places, and they are also calling to the simple and those who lack sense to come and eat bread and wine. In verse 6, it's this call to repent, to leave your simple ways and to live and walk in the way of insight. So we see this distinction between Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly. There are two tables, two banquets taking place. We also see in verses 7 through 12 a distinction between the scoffer and the wise man. And I would say verses 10 through 12 summarize everything quite nicely. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The knowledge of the Holy One is insight. For by me your days will be multiplied, and your years will be added to your life. That is the blessing that comes from fearing the Lord and knowing the Holy One. And this is good. It is wise for yourself, but if you scoff, you alone will bear it. Life and blessing for those who fear the Lord, but those who scoff, it will lead them to death. I would say that summarizes chapter 9 fairly well, and that does conclude our time together. Thank you so much for joining me this week. I hope it was beneficial. Let me remind you to go to church. Our service at Sawyer starts at 10 in the morning with a Sunday school class at 9. Or you can make your way over to Converge in New Buffalo. And that service starts at 11. And again, Sunday school service is at 10. I will most likely be down at the New Buffalo site, so I would love to see you all there. And for our Sunday school class, we will be going through Proverbs chapter 9 together. So study up this week and come on down to Converge, and we can again engage in Proverbs chapter 9 together. All right, with that, may God bless you this week, and we'll see you next time.